The sun bled red over the New Mexico desert when the wagon train was ambushed. Screams rose between gunshots and the thundering hooves of Apache riders. The Monroe family had been traveling west with a dozen settlers, dreamers and farmers chasing a better life. But by sundown, all that remained was smoke, shattered wood, and silence. 18-year-old Clara Monroe crouched behind an overturned wagon wheel, hands trembling over a small silver cross around her neck. Her father, the town preacher, lay not far away, his Bible scattered in the dust, pages fluttering like broken wings. The world she knew, church bells, hymns, Sunday dresses, had been swallowed by the wild, merciless frontier. Through the haze of smoke, a figure appeared on horseback. The rider's dark hair was bound with leather, his chest bare save for a band of shells and paint. His eyes found hers instantly, fierce, unreadable, and before she could cry out, he was upon her. She fought, clawed, prayed. "Let me go," she sobbed as he lifted her effortlessly onto his horse. The man said nothing. Only when they reached the edge of the canyon and the others had scattered into the shadows did he slow. The Apache's name was Taza, a warrior known for his silence and his scars. Blood streaked his shoulder from a gunshot wound, but he rode on as though it were nothing. He stopped at a shallow river, dismounted, and set her down on the sand. The girl stumbled away, her white dress torn, her bonnet gone, eyes wild with terror. "Why?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Why take me? What do you want?" Taza crouched by the water, rinsing his wound, unmoved by her fear. "Others would sell you," he said at last, his English rough but clear. "I keep you safe." "Safe?" she repeated, disbelief in her voice. "You killed my father. You—" He turned to face her, eyes dark as obsidian. "Your father shot first." His words cut through her anger like the desert wind, sharp and dry. She looked away, tears blurring the endless canyon walls. Everything was dust and silence. The world felt too big and she too small. When night came, the desert turned cold. Taza built a fire and left her a blanket of woven wool. She huddled near the flames, afraid to sleep, afraid to speak. Every shadow looked like danger, every breath like a prayer unanswered. He sat a few feet away, sharpening a blade, watching the horizon. The firelight danced over his face, the lines of strength, the quiet beneath the violence. He did not touch her. He did not speak again until she broke the silence. "Does it hurt?" she asked suddenly, her eyes flicking to his bandaged shoulder. He looked up, surprised. "A little. I meant—" She hesitated, her cheeks flushed by firelight. "Does it hurt and to love for the first time?" For a long moment he said nothing. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the lonely cry of a coyote. Then Taza set down the knife, his gaze softening. He seemed to search her face, not for words, but for truth. "Easy," he whispered finally. "It'll be quick." She didn't understand, not then. His tone wasn't cruel nor mocking. It was quiet, almost tender, as though he were speaking not of love but of pain, of wounds that heal faster when you stop fighting. The girl turned away, clutching the blanket tighter. Her heart thudded painfully, a wild bird in her chest. She feared him, yes, but she also feared herself. Because somewhere between his gentleness and his power, she felt something new stirring inside her, something dangerous, forbidden, and alive. Above them, the stars blazed cold and clear, untouched by the war between their worlds. In that moment, a preacher's daughter and a hunted warrior, neither knew what they had begun, but the desert did. It had seen this story before, how love, like pain, always finds a way to return. The desert awoke with a chill that bit through bone and faith alike. Clara Monroe stirred where she lay beside the dying campfire, the woven blanket rough against her skin. For a moment she thought it a dream, the red cliffs, the smoke-stained sky, the echo of hoofbeats. But when she looked up and saw him, crouched by the stream washing blood from his arm, reality settled in heavy and hard. The Apache was still there. Taza. His back was broad, bronzed by sun and scar. He moved with the patience of a man who had lived his whole life by the rhythm of the earth. No wasted motion, no sound but the whisper of water and wind. Clara pushed herself up, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. Her father had once told her that fear was the devil's language, that courage came from God. But out here, in this endless wilderness, she wasn't sure which voice spoke louder. Will you kill me? She asked softly. Taza turned, eyes meeting hers. If I wanted, you'd be gone already. Her lips parted, but she found no reply. He wasn't boasting. It was simply truth, a truth she both hated and needed. She looked around, no sign of the others. Just the canyon stretching wide and empty. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. He rose and walked toward her, carrying a small clay bowl. Drink, he said. Water. I'm not thirsty, she murmured, her pride still clinging to the ruins of her old life. You are, he said simply, and pressed the bowl into her hands. The water was cold, tasting faintly of dust and stone. As she drank, she realized she hadn't had a sip since the ambush. He noticed the tremor in her hands and guided the bowl for her, careful, unhurried. His fingers brushed hers, and though his touch was brief, she felt it burn like a spark. When she finished, he nodded once. You help me, he said, pointing to his shoulder wound. Wrap it. I don't know how. You learn. He sat before her, close enough for her to smell the earth and smoke clinging to his skin. She hesitated, then tore a strip from the hem of her dress. Her mother would have fainted at the sight. Her daughter tending an Apache, her dress in tatters, her heart at war with itself. Her fingers trembled as she cleaned the blood, the wound deep but clean. You could die, she whispered. We all die. His voice was low, calm. But not today. There was no fear in him, no plea for pity. Only acceptance, the kind born from too many battles and too few tomorrows. She tied the cloth tight, and when he grunted, she flinched. Sorry, she said quickly. Good, he murmured. Means you care. She froze, his words washing over her like a confession she didn't mean to make. When she looked up, their eyes met. The fire crackled between them, a thin line dividing two worlds. Hours passed. He spoke little, but his silences began to speak for him. A language older than English, older than prayer. She watched the way he studied the stars before sleeping, how he traced symbols in the dust near the fire. When she asked what they meant, he said, Stories of my people, of the wind, the hawk, the woman who loved the moon. You believe in such things? She asked. He smiled faintly. You believe in a man who walks on water? That silenced her. For the first time, she wondered if faith wore many faces, and if hers had just changed. Later, when he lay down near the fire, she whispered, Will you let me go? Taza didn't open his eyes. When you are safe. And when will that be? Maybe never, he said, voice fading into the wind. She watched him sleep, the fire painting his skin in shades of gold and shadow. There was a strength in him that frightened her, not because it could hurt her, but because it made her feel protected. And as the night deepened, Clara Monroe realized something far more dangerous than captivity was taking root. She was beginning to trust him. By the third day, the desert had stripped Clara Monroe of everything familiar. The starch of her Sunday dress, the comfort of clean hands, the sound of her own language. The wilderness did not care for prayers or manners. It cared for survival, and somehow so did she. Taza led her through a maze of crimson cliffs and dry riverbeds, where the only sounds were wind, cicadas, and the scuff of their boots against stone. His wound had begun to heal under her careful hands, but his silence still weighed heavier than the heat. Clara walked behind him, clutching the blanket he'd given her, her bonnet long lost to the wind. Where are we going? She asked finally. He glanced back without stopping. To water. Her throat was dry enough to crack. How far? Far, he said. Then, after a pause, You can rest when the sun hides. She bit her lip. Back home in the Kansas prairie, men had spoken to her as though she were porcelain. Her father had preached that women must be gentle and quiet. But there was nothing gentle in this place, and she found herself growing harder with every step, or perhaps truer. When the sun fell behind the red rock ridges, the world turned copper and violet. Taza stopped at a small hollow where a thin stream wound between boulders. Clara dropped to her knees beside it, scooping water into her mouth, careless of her appearance. It was cold and pure and tasted like grace itself. Taza crouched nearby, watching the horizon. You drink like a coyote, he said. She looked up, startled, and then saw the flicker of a smile at the corner of his lips. The first she'd ever seen. I suppose I do, she said, breathless, but you haven't exactly treated me like a lady. He met her eyes, his expression unreadable again. Lady or coyote, both must learn to live. Something in his tone made her heart twist. She wanted to argue, to insist she wasn't like him, that she didn't belong to the savage world. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she followed him to gather wood, watching how he read the land as easily as she once read scripture. Every track, every sound meant something to him. To her, it was all mystery. By the time darkness fell, they had made a small fire between two stones. The night air was sharp and smelled faintly of sage. Clara sat close to the flames, rubbing her hands together, while Taza roasted a rabbit over the coals. She tried not to stare at his arms the way the light caught the muscles when he moved, but it was like trying not to look at lightning. When he handed her a piece of meat, she hesitated. "I don't eat wild things." "Then you die," he said simply. She took it. The taste was smoky and strange, but it filled her belly and dulled her fear. When they finished, she watched him turn his face toward the stars. They seemed close enough to touch out here, scattered over the sky like spilled salt. "Do you ever wish you were someone else?" she asked suddenly. "No," he said, still watching the heavens. "You?" She thought of the life she'd left behind. The pews, the sermons, the promise that good girls would find good husbands. That world had burned with her father's wagon. "I used to," she said quietly. "Now I don't know who I am." Taza turned to her, eyes glinting in the firelight. "You are learning." "Learning what?" "To live without walls." The word struck her like a hand to the heart. He wasn't speaking only of the desert. He was speaking of something deeper. The way she'd been taught to hide her curiosity, her anger, her longing. She looked away, unable to bear the truth in his gaze. When the wind rose, he threw another branch into the fire and wrapped his blanket around her shoulders. His fingers brushed her cheek, not by accident this time. It was a brief touch, but it carried warmth that no flame could match. For a long moment, neither spoke. The desert around them was endless, the night alive with the whisper of sand and stars. Clara felt her breath catch as she realized she was no longer afraid of him. She was afraid of herself, of how much she needed him to survive, and how much more she might need him still. The fire burned low, its last embers glowing like the heart of the desert itself. Clara Monroe sat with her knees drawn to her chest, the rough wool of Taza's blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The night stretched vast and wordless above them, the Milky Way spilling across the heavens like a river of light. She had never seen so many stars, nor felt so small beneath them. Taza sat nearby, cross-legged, his dark hair loose, falling over his shoulders. He was sharpening his knife on a stone, the rhythmic scrape breaking the silence. Clara watched him from the corner of her eye. Each movement, precise and calm, felt both comforting and dangerous, a reminder that he could end her life or protect it, and she still didn't know which he meant to do. "What are you thinking about?" she asked at last, her voice no louder than the whisper of wind. "Home," he said simply. "Do you have one?" He stopped sharpening and looked into the fire. "Had long ago." She wanted to ask more, but something in his face held her back. Then after a moment he spoke, slowly, as though each word cost him something. "When I was small, soldiers came. They burned our lodges. My mother ran with me to the river. She was shot there. My father fought until the sky turned red. That day I learned there is no home without peace." The word struck her chest like a blow. She'd lost her father too, but not like that. Not with such cruelty. "I'm sorry," she whispered, meaning it with every piece of her heart. He looked at her then, really looked, as though searching for deceit, and finding none. His voice softened. "You ask why I fight. I fight so my people can sleep without fear. So our children can laugh. You understand?" She nodded, though tears burned her eyes. "I thought Apaches were monsters," she admitted. "That's what everyone said. That's what I was taught." Taza gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "And what are white men taught? That we have no hearts?" The question hung between them like smoke. Clara's hands twisted in the blanket. "Maybe we're all just taught to be afraid of what we don't know." For a long time there was only silence, the kind that feels heavy with something unspoken. The fire crackled, the desert breathed, and the stars turned slowly above. Taza reached into a small pouch at his side and pulled out a smooth, flat stone carved with a symbol, a circle surrounded by lines like rays of sun. He held it out to her. "This," he said, "is for remembering. My mother wore it." She hesitated, then took it carefully, feeling its warmth from his hand. "You should keep it," she said softly. I give, he replied. Now it remembers you too. The gesture undid her. Her throat tightened, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, I don't deserve it. He tilted his head. Deserve? Desert decides who lives, not hearts. You live. You deserve. His words were strange, but the meaning was clear, and it made her chest ache. When he looked at her again, his eyes seemed different, not the eyes of a captor, but of a man seeing someone he could lose. Why are you kind to me? She asked. Because you are afraid, he said. And I know that pain. She wanted to say more, but her voice failed. Instead, she stared into the fire, her heart pounding with something that wasn't fear anymore. After a long silence, she felt movement and a brush of air as he reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips lingered for a breath too long. Clara looked up at him, her lips parting. For an instant, the world around them disappeared. No war, no tribe, no past. Only the pulse of two hearts and the warmth of shared breath beneath a sky too vast to care. When she finally spoke, her words came out in a trembling whisper. You shouldn't touch me. His voice was quiet, steady. Then why do you not move away? She didn't, she couldn't. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, a coyote howled, long and lonely. Clara's tears slipped free, not from fear, but from the dawning knowledge that she was falling for the man she was supposed to hate. And when she finally lay down to sleep, the stars above her seemed to burn with a strange, aching beauty, the kind only the heart could understand. By the time Taza and Clara reached the Apache camp, the sun was sinking behind the cliffs, casting long shadows over the valley of lodges. Smoke curled upward from cook fires and the sound of drums echoed faintly, low, mournful, like the heartbeat of a dying world. Clara's steps faltered as they entered the camp. Eyes followed her, sharp, suspicious eyes. Women paused in their work. Men straightened from where they sharpened spears or tanned hides. To them she was a ghost, pale, foreign, and wrong. A Twagoda, a white woman, the enemy. Taza's hand rested lightly at her back. Do not look down, he murmured. Walk proud, she tried, though her knees trembled. Children peered from behind their mother's skirts. A boy threw a stone that landed near her feet. Another shouted a word she didn't know, but the mocking tone was clear. Taza stopped, turned, and said something sharp in Apache. The boys scattered like startled quail. They reached a large lodge near the center of camp. Inside it smelled of smoke and sage. The air was dim, lit only by a small fire pit where an old man sat cross-legged, wrapped in a robe of faded buffalo hide. His hair was silver, his face carved deep with years. Clara felt Taza bow beside her. Father, he said. The old man's eyes, clouded but piercing, lifted to his son. Then they fell on her. You bring a white woman into my home? She was captive, Taza said. The others would have harmed her. I brought her to safety. The chief, Khotan, studied her in silence. Clara tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come. His gaze felt like stone pressing down on her soul. Do you know what you ask, my son? The old man said slowly. The world is burning between your people and hers. You bring that fire here. Taza's jaw tightened. The fire is already here. I only bring truth. Khotan's expression did not change, but his voice softened with weariness. Truth does not feed the hungry or bury the dead. He looked again at Clara. What name do they call you, white girl? She hesitated, then bowed her head. Clara. Clara Monroe. The chief's mouth curved, not in kindness but understanding. Monroe, the preacher's daughter. Her eyes widened. You knew my father? Khotan nodded slowly. He came years ago to speak of peace. He spoke well. But the soldiers who followed him spoke with bullets. The words stung like ash. Her father had died preaching faith to men who carried guns. And now she stood before a man whose family had been destroyed by the same hands. Khotan turned to his son. What do you mean to do with her? Taza met his father's gaze without flinching. Protect her, until the army leaves these lands. The chief studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You will make enemies among your own. Many already call you weak for showing mercy. If you keep her here, the tribe will demand her fate be decided by blood. I will stand for her, Taza said. Khotan's eyes softened then, just slightly, a father's pain hidden behind a leader's mask. You are my son. My heart is tired of war. If you swear before the spirits that your path is true, I will not stand in your way. But remember, every gift taken from the wind must one day be returned. That night the chief's blessing, quiet and solemn, spread through the camp like fire in dry grass. Some spat when Clara passed. Others simply stared. But she remained near Taza's lodge, where he built her a small place to sleep. He said little, his silence gentler now, as if words might break something fragile between them. As she lay beneath the blanket he'd given her, Clara stared at the shadows dancing on the hide walls. The chief's words echoed in her mind. Every gift taken from the wind must be returned. She didn't know what that meant yet, but she could feel it. Heavy as the sky before a storm, outside, she heard Taza speaking softly in his native tongue, prayers or perhaps promises. And though she didn't understand a word, her heart did. For the first time since her capture, Clara Monroe was not afraid of the Apaches. She was afraid of what she had begun to feel for one of them. The moon rose full and heavy that night, bright enough to paint the desert silver. The air was alive with drum beats and voices, laughter, chanting, the sound of moccasins stamping into the dust. It was the Moon Festival, a time when the Apache celebrated the turning of seasons, the balance between life and death, the spirits of the hunt. Clara Monroe had never seen anything like it. She stood outside Taza's lodge, her pale face glowing faintly in the firelight as women gathered around her, speaking in lilting tones she barely understood. They carried bowls of paint, feathers, and beads. Taza approached, his expression unreadable. "They wish to dress you," he said. "Dress me?" She echoed, startled. "For the dance. My father says all must join, even the stranger." Clara's eyes widened. "I can't dance their way. I don't even—" "Then learn," he interrupted softly. "You live here now. You must be part of the night or it will swallow you." There was no argument in him, only quiet certainty. Reluctantly, she let the women guide her inside. They painted her cheeks with red clay, braided her hair, and tied a necklace of turquoise and shell around her neck. One of them draped a buckskin dress over her shoulders, light as air, the fringe brushing her knees. When she stepped outside again, Taza was waiting. For the first time, his eyes widened. The girl who had once trembled in a torn white dress now stood before him like something born of the desert. Shy, uncertain, but radiant. "Does it look foolish?" she asked, self-conscious. He shook his head slowly. "No, it looks right." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. Before she could reply, the drums began to beat harder, faster. Flames roared higher. Men circled the fire, chanting to the rhythm of the earth, while women moved like shadows, graceful and solemn. Taza joined the men, his movements strong and fluid. The air pulsed with energy. Clara stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding. Then one of the women, the chief's wife, old but kind, took her hands and led her forward. "Goya, dance," the woman said, smiling. Clara stumbled, then found herself moving, letting the drum guide her steps. It was awkward at first. She was a preacher's daughter, not meant for wild things. But soon the rhythm found her. Her bare feet struck the sand. The fringe of her dress swayed, and for the first time since she'd been taken, she felt free. Across the fire, Taza's eyes found hers. He stopped dancing just for a moment, and the world seemed to stop with him. The flames flickered between them, reflecting in his gaze. There was pride there. And something else, something she could no longer pretend not to see. But not everyone shared his wonder. From the shadows, a young warrior named Clancho watched her, his face twisted with resentment. He was of Taza's age, tall and bitter, one who had long envied the chief's son. To him, the white girl was an insult, a curse on their people. When the dancing ended and the crowd broke into smaller fires, Clancho stepped forward, blocking Taza's path. "Why do you shame your blood?" he snarled in Apache. "You bring her here, and a daughter of our enemies. You defy your father's will." Taza's tone was calm but cold. "My father gave his blessing," Clancho spat in the dirt. "Then his spirit is weak." The moment snapped like a dry branch. Before anyone could stop him, Taza lunged. The two men clashed in a blur of motion, fists, dust, and fury. The drums fell silent. Clara screamed, but no one moved to help. This was a warrior's fight. Taza struck Clancho down hard, pinning him to the ground, a knife pressed to his throat. The firelight flickered over his face, not rage, but a grim finality. "You speak of honor," Taza said. "Then remember mine." He let the man go. Clancho stumbled away humiliated, blood on his lip and hatred in his eyes. When the crowd dispersed, Taza turned to Clara. His knuckles were raw, his breathing rough. She stepped toward him without thinking. "You could have killed him. I know, why didn't you?" He looked at her then, the moonlight soft on his face. "Because you were watching." Something in her heart broke open, not from fear, but from the unbearable tenderness of that truth. Later that night, when the fires burned low and the camp grew quiet, Clara found herself standing beside him on the ridge above the valley. The air was cool, the stars sharp and endless. "I don't want to go home," she whispered suddenly. Taza's breath caught. "Then stay." It was not an order nor a plea, just a truth between them. And when she turned to look at him, his gaze was filled with the kind of promise words could never hold. That night the desert felt alive. The wind sang across the red mesas. The coyotes howled from the far ridges and the stars glimmered like shards of broken silver. In the Apache camp, a quiet unease lingered. Word had spread that the white soldiers were moving north, too close to their lands. Every warrior sharpened his blade and prayed to the Great Spirit for strength. Ayana sat near the fire, her hair loose, eyes fixed on the horizon. She had changed so much since the night she was captured. No longer the frightened girl from a frontier mission, but not yet the full-hearted woman she was meant to be. She wore Apache beads around her neck now, a gift from Taji. Still, she didn't know what it meant, whether it was love, protection, or a promise he hadn't spoken aloud. Taji approached quietly, his bare feet soundless in the dust. "You should sleep," he said, crouching beside her. "Tomorrow may be war." She turned to him. "And if it is, will you go?" "I must," he said simply. "My people's blood runs in this ground. If I do not fight, I dishonor the ones who died before me." The words stung her heart. She didn't want to lose him, this wild man who had once been her captor and now somehow her protector. "Taji," she whispered, "if you die, I'll have no one left." He looked at her then, really looked. In the glow of the fire, her face was soft, trembling, her eyes holding both fear and something deeper. Slowly he reached out, brushing his fingers along her jaw. "You have the desert," he murmured. "You have the wind. You have what I have taught you to survive." She caught his hand. "That isn't enough." For a long moment silence stretched between them. Then Taji rose and took her with him, walking away from the camp into the shadowed canyon. The moon hung full above them, red as blood, heavy with meaning. "Why is it red?" she asked softly. "It is a sign," he said. "The old ones say when the moon bleeds, hearts must choose, love or war." Ayana shivered. "Then I choose love," she said. He turned toward her, his eyes dark, his chest rising with the weight of everything he felt but didn't say. "Do you know what that means, little one?" "I know it hurts," she whispered. "And I don't care." He stepped closer. "Does it hurt to love for the first time?" The words trembled on her lips. "Yes." And the Apache whispered, "Easy. It'll be quick." He drew her against him, his hand cupping the back of her neck, his breath warm against her skin. The world seemed to fade, the danger, the war, the hate between their peoples. There was only the sound of her heartbeat, fast and unsteady, and his voice low as thunder. Under that crimson moon, love came to her like fire, burning, cleansing, awakening something she had never known was inside her. Later, when the night grew quiet and the fire in her soul dimmed to embers, she rested her head against his chest. "If you must go to war," she said, "I will go too." Taji smiled faintly, brushing her hair from her face. "You are brave but foolish." "Then I am yours," she said. "Foolish or not." He kissed her forehead, his voice barely a whisper. "You are mine, and when this is over, when the blood of men stops soaking this land, I will take you home." But both of them knew that in the West, promises were fragile as glass, and the red moon above them would bear witness to a love that might not survive the dawn. The night ended in silence, two souls bound together beneath a dying sky, not knowing if the sun would rise on love or loss. Dawn broke with the sound of thunder, but it wasn't the sky. It was the crack of rifles echoing across Red Mesa. Smoke rolled over the valley like a storm, and horses screamed as they fell. The Apache warriors, proud and fierce, moved through the rocks like shadows, striking and vanishing. The white soldiers, 20 of them, marched in tight formation, their blue coats flashing beneath the rising sun. Taji led the charge from the ridge, his long hair tied back, his body painted for war. He moved like wind, swift, sure, unafraid. The memory of Ayana's trembling lips the night before still burned in his mind, a flame that made him reckless. "Hold the ridge," he shouted in Apache. "For the ancestors!" Arrows flew, muskets fired. Dust filled the air. Ayana watched from the canyon below, hidden among the sagebrush. Taji had forbidden her to follow, but she had never been one to obey. Her heart pounded as she clutched the rifle he'd given her. It was too heavy, too strange in her small hands. Yet she couldn't stand still while he fought for everything he loved. The wind carried the screams of battle down to her, and she felt tears sting her eyes. She had seen death before, her parents murdered by raiders, the trail of graves on the frontier. But this was different. This was love under fire, and it terrified her. When she saw Taji stumble, clutching his arm, she gasped. He didn't fall, but his blood was on the sand. Her body moved before her mind could stop it. She ran. Bullets tore the air around her as she climbed the ridge. She slipped on loose stone, caught herself, kept going. The white soldiers saw her, a pale woman in a torn dress, hair flying like a banner, and hesitated. Was she a hostage, a ghost? That heartbeat of confusion was all the Apache needed. From behind the rocks they rose in unison, firing down. The soldiers scattered. Taji saw her then. His face changed from fury to disbelief to fear. "Ayana!" he shouted. "Go back!" But she didn't stop. She reached him as another shot rang out. The bullet struck near his feet, kicking up sand. He pulled her down behind a boulder, gripping her shoulders. "Are you mad?" he growled, his breath ragged. "I couldn't let you die," she said, tears streaking her face. "You would die for me?" "Yes," she whispered. "Because I already live for you." His heart clenched. There were no words for what that meant in his tongue, only the truth of it shining in her eyes. He touched her cheek once, briefly, before rising to fight again. She watched him go, her heart hammering, as he joined his men at the crest of the ridge. The Apache war cries rose like a storm. The soldiers broke ranks. By noon, the valley was theirs. When the last echo of gunfire faded, the wind carried only silence. The red mesas stood tall, ancient, and unmoved. The ground was littered with the fallen, Apache and white men both. Ayana climbed to where Taji stood, his arm bound in a strip of leather, his face grim. "You're hurt," she said softly. He nodded. "But alive." She touched his chest, feeling the thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "The Great Spirit was with you." He shook his head. "No, you were." Her lips trembled. She didn't know what to say, so she simply leaned into him. The smell of gunpowder clung to his skin. Around them, the survivors gathered their dead, chanting low prayers for the souls crossing the spirit path. Taji wrapped an arm around her and stared at the horizon, where the sky burned gold and crimson. "We won today," he said, "but the white men will come again. They always do." Ayana swallowed hard. "Then we'll face them again, together." He turned to her, his dark eyes full of something that looked like both sorrow and devotion. "Together," he repeated, and as the sun dipped low, painting the battlefield in blood and fire, the virgin girl and the Apache stood side by side, no longer captor and captive, but bound by something far stronger than war, the first wild, dangerous love of the West. The weeks after Red Mesa passed like smoke through the wind, heavy with sorrow, soft with silence. The Apache had won the battle but lost too many men. Mothers wailed for their sons, and the elders whispered that the spirits were restless. The army would not forget the defeat. Vengeance was certain. Taji knew this. Every sunrise he rode the ridges, scouting for dust clouds that might signal soldiers. Every sunset he returned to find Ayana waiting, mending clothes, tending fires, her hair glinting copper in the dying light. She had learned their language now, her soft English replaced by Apache words shaped by desert wind. The people had begun to accept her, some calling her Moonfire, others the White Wife. But she knew it wasn't that simple. Not yet. One evening, as the sky turned violet, Taji came to her tent. His face was grave, his body still bandaged from the wound that hadn't fully healed. "The army gathers again," he said quietly. "They come from Fort Stanton this time. Twice as many." Her hands froze over the thread she was holding. "Then we run," she said. "There are mountains." "You said there are caves the soldiers can't reach." He shook his head. "They will find us. They always find us, Ayana stood, her eyes fierce. Then we'll fight. I'll fight with you. Taji smiled, but there was sadness in it. You have the heart of a warrior, little one. But your hands were not meant for killing. She clenched her fists. My hands were meant for holding you. Isn't that reason enough to stay and fight? His eyes softened, and for a long moment neither spoke. The desert around them glowed red as the sun slipped away. That night the camp prepared to move. The elders prayed, the warriors sharpened their blades, and mothers gathered their children. Taji helped pack their horses, then went to find Ayana. She stood beside the river, watching the reflection of the stars ripple on the water. When she saw him, her breath caught. Will you really leave me behind? She asked. I cannot take you where I go, he said. If I die, you must live. The desert will hide you. She shook her head, tears in her voice. Don't you understand? I'd rather die with you than live without you. He reached her in 2 strides and pulled her close. Do not speak death, he murmured. Speak life. For me. But her tears spilled over. Then promise me something. Promise me you'll come back. Taji's silence was the only answer. In the early hours before dawn, he rode out with his warriors. The earth trembled beneath the hooves of their horses. Dust rose like ghosts in the half-light. Ayana stood on the ridge, watching them disappear into the horizon, her heart breaking with every beat. The day stretched long and merciless. She prayed to every god she knew, the Christian god of her childhood and the Apache spirit she had come to believe in. She prayed for the man who had stolen her fear and given her something far more dangerous, hope. By nightfall, she could stand it no longer. She saddled a horse and rode. The plains were endless, the stars cold and bright. She followed the trail of hoofprints until the air smelled of smoke and iron. And then, she saw it. A battlefield. Again. Bodies lay scattered among the mesquite bushes. Horses, men, Apache and soldier alike, and in the center a single figure slumped beside a black horse, blood dark against his chest. Ayana fell from her saddle, her knees hitting the earth. Taji! She cried, her voice breaking. He turned his head slowly, his face pale in the moonlight. You fool, he whispered. I told you not to come. She caught him as he sagged, pressing her hands over the wound. No, you can't leave me. He smiled faintly. I told you. The moon would bleed for love, she shook her head sobbing. Then let it bleed forever. The desert wind carried their words away. Around them the world was silent except for the slow, steady rhythm of 2 hearts that had found each other in the wildest, most unforgiving land of all. Ayana bent her head to his, whispering through her tears, If this is our last ride, then I'll ride it with you. And as the moon climbed over the ridge, pale and red as their love, she held him close, refusing to let the night take him from her. The dawn came softly that morning, a pale wash of gold spilling over the ridges, touching the bodies on the ground. The wind was still, as if even the desert held its breath. Ayana lay beside Taji, his head resting on her lap, her hands stained with blood and dust. His breathing was shallow, but it was still there, a fragile rhythm, a promise refusing to die. She whispered his name again and again, as though the sound itself could keep him alive. Taji, please, you can't leave me. Not yet, his eyelids fluttered. You are crying again, he murmured weakly. Even the desert doesn't weep so much. She almost laughed, choked by tears. You taught me to be strong. I can't forget that now. Taji looked at her for a long time. His dark eyes, once fierce as stormlight, now glowed with peace. You were meant to live, Ayana, to bring life where there is none. I can't without you, she said, her voice breaking. He tried to reach for her hand but lacked the strength. The white men will come again. Promise me you'll run. Find your people. You are my people, she whispered fiercely. He smiled faintly, and the faint desert light gilded his face. Then carry me with you. Ayana pressed her forehead to his. Always. When he closed his eyes, the silence that followed was both unbearable and sacred. The wind rose again, sweeping gently across the plain, lifting his hair, carrying his spirit into the dawn. Hours passed before she could move. The sun climbed higher, burning away the night. Ayana buried him where the canyon met the river, under a red rock where wild sage grew. She carved his name into the stone with a blade and whispered the Apache prayer he had once taught her. He rides with the sun. His shadow walks beside me. Then she turned and began to walk. Days blurred into one another. The desert was cruel, but she was no longer the frightened virgin who had once begged for mercy. She knew how to find water in the rocks, how to follow the stars, how to listen to the earth. Every night she spoke to him as if he were still beside her, whispering the words she had never found the courage to say aloud while he lived. Weeks later, she found a mission settlement near the border. The people there didn't recognize her at first, her skin darkened by sun, her dress torn and covered in dust. But when she spoke softly, her English returned like a forgotten song. They took her in. She helped in the gardens, taught the children, and nursed the sick. She smiled when they called her Sister Ayana. But when the night came, she walked beyond the walls, barefoot in the sand, and looked up at the sky. The moon was full again, white now, no longer bleeding. One evening, a rider approached from the horizon. He was young, Apache by his dress, and carried a bundle wrapped in deer hide. He stopped before her and bowed his head. "The Chief Taji's son," he said in halting English. "He lived." He said his woman was white. "His blood." "It is your blood." Ayana's heart stopped. She opened the bundle with trembling hands, and inside was a newborn child sleeping peacefully. Tears fell like rain onto the desert sand. "He told you to bring him to me?" she whispered. The young warrior nodded. "He said the desert must bloom again." Ayana looked down at the baby whose tiny fingers curled around hers. "Then it will," she said softly, "because love never dies in the desert. It just changes form." That night she stood on the same ridge where she and Taji had first looked upon the bleeding moon. The wind was warm, the sage fragrant, and in her arms she held the living proof that even in the Wild West, where guns and hate ruled the day, love could take root, bloom and outlast everything. The virgin girl was gone. The woman who stood there was forged in fire and faith, mother of both worlds, Apache and white. And as the sun set over the red mesas painting the land in gold, Ayana whispered to the wind, "You were right, my love. The desert blooms again.